I wanted this to be as much of a surprise for me as it is for you, so I shuffled all my slides just a minute ago, and we'll see where it goes from there. Might even walk around down there a little bit. But so this is, let's see if this is going to work. Is it? Uh-oh. See, I shouldn't have shuffled the slides. Now let's do it this way. Here we go. Okay, so rise of culture, taking DevOps to the next level. It was working a minute ago. Let's try it again. There we go. Let's see. Whatever. We'll work with it. Okay. I'm actually really happy to see some of the talks that were already here today, starting with, I think, Emily and Tiffany yesterday and Corey today. There's a lot of conversation around culture, and I think we all know, obviously, how important that is, right? Starting with the tools is a good place to start, but it usually doesn't get you very far. And so there's a lot here. I've tried to whittle it down, and it can be pretty dense. So I'm going to try to move through it. I'm going to be watching my time pretty closely, and we'll just kind of see where it goes. So this is a version of a talk I actually gave at DevOps Enterprise Summit a few months ago. The deck is available, or it will be if anybody wants it. And just a little bit of background. We talked about that already. I'm in a small company now, but I actually spent 20 years in the banks. So I saw a lot of the big city problems with, I was first Union Wachovia, Wells Fargo, so right, three banks, same seat, and then Bank of America after that, creating large-scale DevOps programs. So large-scale meaning like 350 applications at Wells Fargo and upwards of 800 at Bank of America. And yeah, the tooling's a challenge because when you come to all these groups and they have anywhere from 50 to 100 tools spread out across what you're trying to integrate, that's just part of the problem. And then you have all the different groups and cultures. So it wasn't really as challenging technically as it was to getting people to work together. I'm now working with different sizes of financial services firms. Is there a question already? Oh, no, okay. Luis is back there taking pictures. What is interesting, and I've found over the last, I don't know, 6 or 8 months, is what I thought were just like big bang problems, we see in basically organizations of every size, 30, 50, 500. So the patterns are emerging, and it's interesting. It is really about, culture is really how you take everything to the next level. I was in the National Guard 15 years, so I bring a lot of that type of leadership background with me as well. I'm really big on empowering or emancipating your people and the leadership aspects of that. People think maybe the military is a very rigid structure. It does have a lot of guidelines, but they do want you to think independently. And I think a lot of people kind of miss that part. I think you can attest to that, right? Yep. Yeah, it's like, it's the why, right? Here, we're going to tell you how, not what to do and how to do it necessarily, but here's what we're trying to achieve. Go figure it out. And it's actually pretty cool. So I'll just start here, in case I lose some of you along the way. There's only, if you take away 4 things today, think about these 4 things, okay? DevOps, and we've heard this already this morning a couple times, it solves social problems and value alignment. It isn't really a technical challenge. Not really. Okay, we all know how to install tools. We can do that in 10 minutes, right? That isn't the problem. I just said that. Small companies have big company problems. In fact, I'm working with a company I'm really amazed at, for as small as they are, how they're trying to create like Bank of America-sized problems. You don't need to do that. I love this quote, Arthur Ashe, okay? Most of the questions we get is, how do I even start this stuff, right? So just start where you are with what you have. And everyone's a leader, and we're going to talk about that. Actually, I'm going to spend a minute on this thing. So, is anybody here in a leadership position? Yeah. Okay, and there's a lot of hands that aren't going up. I'm going to tell you the hands that didn't go up, you guys are wrong. Right? Everybody is in a leadership position, right? Leadership is not a spot on the org chart. Leadership is how you conduct yourself. And we actually heard that, I believe, Emily started it yesterday, right? She's like, how do we conduct ourselves personally? And then Tiffany actually talked about it and said, now if you extend that personal conduct into your organization, change management for humans, that's what you're really doing. You're leading yourself, and then you're taking that leadership piece and extending it into where you have influence. So you are all leaders, right? You don't need somebody to say, hey, you're a leader, right? You have that authority, and you actually have that responsibility to do it, okay? I was actually talking with somebody just before this morning, before it all started, And the conversation around that was, well, how do you do some of those things? And we'll talk about it in a little while, but you basically have to be afraid of not losing your job. Or you need to figure out where that line is, right? We're all at different places in our lives, right? 10 years ago with younger children, I may not have been so bold. As they got older, I was a little bit more bold with how I pushed the boundary and said, that's not the right thing to do. Okay, we each have to find that barrier or that boundary for ourselves, but at the end of the day, you are all leaders, okay? Roadmap. So this is going to be important only because, like I said, I think there's probably a lot of information here. I want to kind of give you the breadcrumb trail. So we're going to make, so many monitors to look at, I'm getting confused. Make the case for culture, right? Some observations, and I think you should kind of resonate with at least some of those. We'll define DevOps, although we've talked about that a lot already today and yesterday. Money and secrets, surveys, and a business case. From there, what I want to really do, I want to spend a little bit of time on the principles, right? And so talk about the imposter syndrome. I'm going to talk a lot about psychology here, and I'm not a psychologist, okay? But I think if we understand some of the principles that are driving how we behave, which ultimately is, right, we can't change culture, but we can change behavior, which influences culture. So if we figure out why we behave the way we do and why others do, one technique that I'll present in the third section might not work in your organizations, but something else will. But if you understand the principles, right, the context of why you're doing it and why people are afraid of things, then you can say, hey, we can make that fit here, okay? So the principles, or the techniques for those principles. So first of all, we'll talk about motivation, fear, change, and trust leadership. Those are three big drivers. And then we'll go through, well, how do you apply those things, all right? And we are going to move pretty fast. Is this familiar to anybody? Right? And all you dev guys up there, you think you're going to get off the hook, you're laughing at the ops guys and the sec guys. So we'll just flip that around for you, okay? Everybody's in the same boat at some point, okay? How about this one? I like this one. There's always a fire drill. I actually was talking with somebody about that this morning. Urgent is not important. And the language you start to hear, pay attention to language. All right, we'll talk a little bit about that. If you hear things like this, right? A few years ago, it was like 10 reasons to get, or 10 statements that get you fired. That top one was at the top of that list. This is how we've always done it. Okay. It's kind of the not invented here syndrome, right? People will take these types of situations and actually they'll use that situation, or they'll use process, or they'll use technology basically to protect what they own, okay? Because they're afraid of giving up what they own, because what they own in an organization kind of identifies who they are, right? That's their identity. That's not good for anybody. So this should be fairly straightforward. I've seen CAMs twice today. I like to throw the L in there, because there is a lean process layer of that, which starts to get towards how we behave, right? And I think after you lay down a tool set, which we've probably all done, the next big thing you can do is start to really examine the process. Take away things that don't matter. Or put things in place that you should have been doing, right? One thing about this, if you're doing some kind of a lean process and it's not aligned to one of the business organizational goals, you really shouldn't be doing it. It's not visible and it's not approved. Okay, if it's that important, go get it approved. So we're not going to talk about those, because this is a talk on culture, and I'm going to say it one more time. We can't really change the culture. The culture is kind of the sum of the organization. If you're the CEO, yeah, maybe you can drive it down and change the culture. But we can't influence behaviors, or change behaviors specifically, which will influence the culture, okay? And an example of that might be, let's say that maybe a nightly build or a build on every check-in is a good idea. So that's a behavior that we want, all right? And developers will say, oh, I'm not going to, I'll check it in tomorrow. So you put things in place to alter that behavior, because you know that the benefit is really good. You're going to shift left testing and defects and discovery, okay? And you do that, so you take behaviors that align to culture and align to the values, and then you look at it and you say, well, what types of process can I put in place to amplify the behavior we want? What types of tooling can we put in place to amplify behavior? Those are the proper places for tools, CI/CD platforms, and lean process, or any kind of process, change management. I might bash on change management. I was a change process owner for a while, so I can do that. But those things are there really for the only reason is to create the types of behavior that align to the values of the organization, okay? Three big blocks, right? Sharing, we know this, right? I take the S out of comms, by the way, because I think sharing is really part of culture. Alignment, we talked about that just now, aligning to the goals. And then the leadership piece. So under leadership, I kind of block trust, fear, and motivation. And then the thing about leadership, too, I kind of see it through three perspectives. You have to lead yourself, okay? Then you may be in charge of a team, literally on an org chart now. So you're going to lead that team, a transformation team, and you have to protect those folks. Let them get the job done. And the third part would be you might be in a position of influence where you aren't actually an organizational leader, but you might be that person everybody goes to for an answer. You're leading the organization, whether you like it or not, okay? So the differentiation case. Let me ask this question, right? And very self-serving questions. You know where I'm going with this already. Do we really have access to the same tooling? We don't. Do you think we do? I mean, does everybody have access to Jenkins, Nexus? It's open source, right? Unless there's an internal regulation that says don't download the open source, we have access to pretty much everything free. Kubernetes, right? It's all out there. There are some tools in certain capability spaces that there may not be a good solution for you and you might have to buy it. So then let's say within a dollar amount of reason, I know that there is several commercial deployment tools from large, well-known vendors that you can get for $50,000. Maybe not an enterprise license agreement, but you can start to do the important things with $50,000. That might sound like a lot to some folks in the room, but in the grand scheme of things, that's not a big spend on tooling. So within reason, do we have access to the same types of technology? And I think we can all agree there. What about information? Lean process, other types of information, right? Do we have that? I came home from work a couple of weeks ago, and my wife said, hey, I fixed the trap under the sink. I watched a YouTube video. I'm like, cool. I don't have to do that this weekend. We know what to do. We know where to find the things to do, right? Nobody's debating what does Agile mean or what goes into a lean transformation. You can find it. So what is the differentiator? Why does one company do really, really well and one doesn't? And it does come down to the people, right? Which basically means it's your culture. So top 3 predictors of organizational performance. This is 2015 State of DevOps report. So Dr. Nicole Forsgren, Jez Humble, Gene Kim, they run DORA. And Puppet, they put the report out with them, right? There's, I think, 5, maybe 6 of them out there. Culture, investment, DevOps, IT performance. Now, when they say organizational performance, they don't mean the IT shop. They mean the entire organization. Wells Fargo, Bank of America, Home Depot. Okay? The organizational performance is predicted by success of these 3 items. Gartner, take it or leave it, is what Gartner is saying, right? 90% of those who try to attempt DevOps without addressing cultural foundations will fail. I think that's true, because I've seen them start well, do well, and then fail in a number of different organizations. Has that been anybody else's experience? Do these kind of feel right, what we're saying so far? Culture's a big driver. Tools, generally, we have access to them. Okay. All right. This is going to be fun. Who here is in a company of 50 or under people? I am. I'm in like 32 to 40. There's a few. What about under 100? Under 200? How many? Who's over 200? Oh, you're going to like this. All right. Where do you think you fall on this? So look at the scale, by the way, right? It's somewhere in the middle is right 50 company, right? And then the number of respondents. This is a D-Zone 2016 Continuous Delivery Survey. All right, watch this. There's your culture line. The respondents from these companies, and I apologize, I don't remember how many respondents they did ask. Maybe it was like 3 people. But I don't remember, I'm sorry. Look at that, though, right? So halfway through, look at the barriers that are there. And I can say, even now, in our small company, right, we're tiny. We're 32 people. We know each other. We've worked together for years in other areas. And we still, right, we're starting to bump into some of this stuff. And we're advising people on how not to do that. And it's pretty funny, actually. Like, we should be, doing what we tell other people to do. So let's dissect it a little bit. There's your 50 line, 50 people in a company. That's where culture starts to goes from the least dominant to the number 2 position. Okay? That's where culture becomes 50% of your respondents at 100. 200, it becomes dominant. 200. I know 200 people, because I think everybody does, right? How can you know 200 people in your same company and still have culture be a problem? Does anybody here know Dunbar's number by any chance? Because I think this is kind of neat. You do. Who else? Anybody? Yeah, what is Dunbar's number? Take a shot. I mean, we've seen it. So Dunbar, did you have it? Pardon? It's about 150, right? There's a lot behind it. It has to do with brain racial cortex. But what it is, it's a social limit, a theoretical social limit that says a human brain can only manage 150 true social relationships at a time. That's kind of interesting, right? So if you say you have 500 Facebook friends, you don't really know those folks, right? It's interesting that whether you believe that theory or not, that it lines up at the point where culture becomes a big issue. There we go. So I skipped it. Ally Financial blew right by. Just to put it in perspective, Ally Financial, 7,600 people. These are Wikipedia numbers. I think they're close. And then way off the charts. And by the way, if you looked around in the room, pretty much everybody was off the chart here, over 200. Right? How do you do that? How do you do that with 200,000 people? It wasn't easy. I think probably at this point, if you weren't convinced already, I think at this point the evidence is out there that to make it past the tooling phase and a small group where you install and run your own Jenkins and you're talking to the business and we're great, except I got to give it to ops and get it into production and there's a problem, right? Here's your business case if you need it, if you're in one of those positions. And this is all coming from State of DevOps report. For those that aren't familiar, they've done research on, I think, about 24,000 companies over, 7,000 companies maybe, 24,000 responses over about 5 or 6 years. All companies, all sizes, all industries. And Nicole Forsgren, Dr. Nicole, she's the CEO of the company. She statistically correlates these things, adds new things into the questionnaires every year. And so this is what comes out of it. And again, remember, when we talk about organization here, high-performing organization, it's the whole organization, not the IT organization. You win in the marketplace. So the organization itself is 2 times as likely to exceed profitability and market share goals. 50% higher market cap over 3 years. Okay? You enable business agility, 46% more frequent deployments. All right? You get to test faster, you left shift stuff, your security gets looked at quicker, and then 440x faster lead times. That's concept to cash. 440 times faster. Right? So if I'm on the business side and I see that, I would definitely like to know how I can beat my competition by factors of hundreds. Is it stable? Okay, 5 times lower change fail rate, from 38% down to 7.5%. That's great, right? If I'm not in one of those executive positions and I'm in one of these support positions, that tells me I get home on Friday night. That tells me I can spend the weekend coaching my son's lacrosse or something. Oh, I skipped mean time to recover, right? Reclaiming business value. I think this one just started coming out this year in this report. 21% less time on unplanned and rework. 44% more time on new work, and 50% less time spent remediating security issues, right? Audit's listening now. They like that. 44% more time on new work. So if you are in a financial position or even somebody who's the business funding technology, what does that mean to you? That means that I can get the same results, 44% hires without hiring anybody, basically. It's one way to look at it, right? All right, so we're going to go back to this one. You know, right, hi, my name is Chris, I have a DevOps problem. That language, when you start to hear a lot of us versus them, you know that there's something there you have to fix. Okay, it should be we, right? We blame the problem, not each other. So the challenges. Okay, so now we're going to get into the principles. Speed it up just a little bit here. 75% of all change fails, change or transformation initiatives. Why is that? Probably a lot of reasons. I'm picking out 3 that we'll talk about today. Motivation, right? How the organization behaves. You may or may not be in a position to do that, to change the motivation of the organization itself. One thing to think about from a DevOps perspective is misaligned incentives, right? And we talk about it all the time. Dev is incentivized to change things. Ops is incentivized to keep things stable. 90 degrees off, okay? What they should be doing is saying, we know things are going to fail. How fast can we get it back? MTTR, okay? Now, unless you're in the HR department or a senior manager, it's kind of hard to make those incentives align between groups. But that's motivation, right? There are some things you can do. We'll talk about it. Trust in leadership, how your leaders are behaving. Remember, we're all leaders now. And then the fear of change. We're going to spend some time here because I think this is a place where we can, as individuals, right, we can make the most impact and do something local. Very quick on motivation, there's a gap. It used to be like this, you know, what science or what the lean manufacturing processes would do would be a carrot stick motivation, right? Not risk reward, but punishment reward. It doesn't work. Especially, it does work for certain things where you're rewarded by the piece, but for knowledge workers, it does not work for us. We'll talk about that. 51% of employees trust their senior management. Okay, right? When you're being asked to do things and go on the edge and take risks, but 51% you can't trust senior management, are you really going to go that far for them? Okay, management has some work to do there. This is cool. This is coming from Dr. Britt Andretta. She has a book called Wired to Resist, and she maps literally 4 areas in the brain. We're physically wired to fear change as humans, okay? We do not like change. It's stressful. There's a human psychological and emotional response to it. Interestingly, they've actually taken the responses to change and they can map it to the grief curves as people go through stages of grief. And furthermore, somebody else took that and said, well, that applies to organization, and organization will demonstrate these sort of layers of grief as well. Okay, so let's talk about that. So real quick, motivation. This is Dan Pink, if you haven't heard of him, you should get the book, The Surprising Truth About What Motivates Us. And as knowledge workers, right, well, let me back up a little bit. Our first drive is survival, okay? And then somewhere, you know, in the manufacturing era, it was extrinsic motivation, reward, punishment. That worked when we're stamping stuff out. But recently, there's research coming out that that does not work for knowledge workers, okay? We need something else. In fact, it's detrimental. If you try to apply the risk-reward, which if you think about that, right, motivating DevOps differently, this is the problem that you start to have, right? So 3 things here: autonomy, mastery, and purpose, right? The autonomy piece is the desire to direct our own lives, okay? And we do it through control over 4 things. So if you're a manager, try to help your folks, give them some control over it, right? And we'll go back to the military example. There's a why, there's a commander's intent. I'm not going to tell you how to do the job. I'm going to say, here's what needs to happen, here's why we need to do it. Go figure it out. Cool? Right? I have autonomy on how to solve the problem, right? For those who remember this, right, we're saying give your folks a piece of the action. And that episode, I believe, was called Piece of the Action. We have an urge to make progress and get better at something that matters. And we have a yearning to do something in the service larger than ourselves. Who contributes to open source? You get paid really well for it, right? You don't. Okay, why do you do it? Greater good. If you took that time and maybe spent it working in your company on overtime or done something else in a profitable venture, you could take the same time and make money doing something, right? You could, but you don't. That's why. So remember this if you're in a position to motivate knowledge workers that work for you or around you. Fear of change. I think we all have our reasons. We've been through it. I worked in, 3 banks, same seat, right? First Union, Wachovia, Wells Fargo. I've been through corporate mergers. It's fearful. Telling me I'm going to go sit in another building is fearful. Having my, there's a change component there. Getting your email system flipped over. All these things. And by the way, change fatigue starts to stack up. So you have to watch those things. I think it's really important, though. I think in a larger corporate setting, we tend to fear that we're proud of the things we've done, somebody's going to take it away, and people get measured by how many people work for them. And those things are all wrong. All right, here's a grief curve really quick. So Dr. Britt Andretta, she took this thing, and she said, well, here's what it looks like. Okay, and then she maps some emotions across it. If you think about this, you're 2/3 through whatever change or transformation this is, and we're still skeptical about stuff. If this was a 1-year program, I'm like in July and not getting anywhere, okay? And finally, we're excited about it. So this is a problem, and we're going to talk about how do we fix that. Real quick on leadership, we're going to get back to that one in a minute. So this is the 3rd principle on trust and leadership, right? You, as a leader, you are very much a salesperson. You're selling DevOps every day if you're doing this sort of thing, okay? You're a psychologist. I was a therapist more than I thought I would be. Again, I guess people thought they could trust me, that I could get messages to senior management and say, hey, something's not working. All right, but I like this definition. You create change, you transform people, you help them become leaders. Okay, that's transformative leadership. And these are some of the things I think, concrete examples. Provide air cover. You're clearing the path for your folks. You're willing to take it for the team, take one for the team, and say no. I said no a lot of times to project teams because I knew it was going to get in the way of doing the things we knew we could do. It didn't make me very popular until the project was done, and we actually were the only ones that had something completed. You have a bias to action, right? And you don't just make your teams feel good, that's important, but you also help them be better, right, by enabling them. Take one for the team. This is Gene Kim, not me. He says the same thing. Transformational leaders put themselves in personal jeopardy because it was the right thing for the company. All right, so this goes back to the self-leadership piece, right? Check your ego, operate with humility. If you don't do that, you're kind of blinded to other people's good ideas, right? Remember the perspective things we were talking about yesterday? These guys happen to be a couple of former Navy SEALs that now do business consulting. And if these guys are saying you should be humble, I think that's probably good advice for everybody. Didn't mean for it to be a leadership theme, it's just a military theme, but some of the good lessons are coming out of these things. Turn the ship around, great book. And this is, I love the way he defines this. You're embedding the capacity for greatness in the people and the practices. If the transformation depends on the leader, when the leader leaves, the transformation dies. Can't do that. Which also goes back to the selfless piece, where you need to make yourself disposable as a leader if you're in one of these kinds of positions, right? So you do that by you give them control. You push authority. He actually has, there's a video here, and he says, he talks about software programmers. Should the software programmer have the authority to deploy into production? Of course. They're the ones that know the most about the application. Some regulations and banks might stop some of us from doing that, but that's the idea. Make sure they're competent, give them clarity, why they're doing it, and then give them control, and then get out of the way. All right. Trust. So you're going to get measured every day, individually or as a leader position, right? There's a hysteresis curve of trust. It takes a long time to build it, and it goes away very quickly. People will look at you for your integrity, intent, capability, and results. And it's okay to have agendas when they're good agendas. If you want to do something today, if you want to start building it, and this is where we're starting to get into techniques you can apply. 13 trust-building actions. It's like Ben Franklin's 13 virtues. Pick one of these. Pick one a week and say, today I'm going to talk straight. Everything I do. Tell your team. If you really want to build it, build that trust with the team. Tell them and say, I'm going to talk straight. If you catch me not talking straight, call me out. And I know we're going pretty fast here. There's a lot behind the principles. So lead with vision and inspiration. These are just a couple of summaries. I'm going to skip through these pretty quick. Pass the torch, selfless service, okay? Lao Tzu quote. Culture drives the organization. It's the sum of the behaviors, and it is a shadow of leaders. Individual choices, motivation, fear of trust, levels of trust, or fear of change, levels of trust. Eli Goldratt, for those who have read The Goal, tell me how you're going to measure me, and I'll tell you how I'm going to behave. Change is fearful, and there are 3 scopes of leadership. So how do we do that in 6 minutes? We're going to flip the script. What we have to do is create a safe place, right? A safe environment, safe relationships to do that. And so it starts like this, right? So this is your fear curve, shock, denial, fear, anger. This is the same order we saw before. We want to reduce the negative impact and then hopefully accelerate or shorten the duration of the change. Make it easier to accept, okay? So we would like the curve to look like that. Okay, how do we do that? Let's flip the script. So the way you do this is you actually look for folks and look for teams and look for people who aren't as afraid of doing it with you, and then start to set the examples. And it sounds simple, and you probably actually all do this sort of unconsciously when you're going through these things in your organizations, okay? So let's flip the script. So now we bring commitment to the left, because that's where we're going to start dealing with folks that are ready for this. All right? What we're doing is remaking mental maps. We're starting to create a condition where we can say, with people that are ready to work with us, here, this is what it's going to look like. It is working. It's safe for you to get on board with it. Look, nobody's getting fired. Nothing bad is happening. People aren't getting blamed for things, okay? So we're going to reduce the negative impact. We accelerate the change. Hopefully they're a little bit happier because it takes away some of the anxiety of the fear of the change. And you're building trust, okay? They can trust the process in the system now. We're going to do this through a couple of areas here: alliances, data, and startup mentality. Just a couple things I picked out. So now these are the techniques that we would use, and that we did in the banks, where we said this is how we made it work. How do we apply those principles? So first of all, just a couple of customer persona. You have enthusiastic adopters, cautious supporters, right, late adopters, and then people who, for whatever reason, 10% of the population, they're never going to be with you for whatever reason. So we want to start here. And by the way, that star is like, if you get to 25%, you just won. You don't need 50%. You don't need 75%. It's a tipping point. Okay? Once you get there, your bigger problem is going to be, how do I manage all of the demand coming my way? So building alliances is usually where we start, right? This is like Survivor Island for DevOps, right? You want to build consensus, trust and legitimacy, probability of success with small but meaningful wins, okay? Give them, like, so example, of a build engineering team. Like, come with us, let's do some of these things together, be part of the team, right? Get them on your side. Once they realize it's safe, they'll actually become your salespersons, your mavens. They'll help you along. They'll defend you when you're not in the room to other people who are maybe trying to shoot down what you're trying to do, okay? Always communicate, and especially if you're in this position, communicate the bad stuff. Because when senior leadership is getting that report and you're giving them the good and the bad, they at least know they're getting true information from you, and that's trust as well, right? If for whatever reason, and this is kind of like scaling out a little bit of DevOps, but if you have either teams you're working with, they're not ready for it, or they lost their enthusiasm, put them on pause, come back to it. All right. So then this other group, the next group, your cautious supporters will say, hey, it looks like it's safe now, I'm going to jump in, I'll give them my support. Okay? You hit your tipping point, and again, don't spend time up there other than just checking in with them. So an alliances review, I'm going to skip through this pretty quick because we kind of just talked about it, but it'll be in the slides if you want to kind of digest some of this. But you need both grassroots and executive support. You can do it one or the other. I have done it both ways, but it's best if you do it, if you can get it both together. Different techniques that might work for you. Not going to read through them. Data and startup mentality. You need data. Everything you do, start building metrics into it. It's going to help you protect and defend what you're doing. Because eventually, if you can quote a decimal, you kind of won the argument. So, you know, I had a person come up to me and say, hey, you haven't done anything for me this year. I go, wait. This week I did 126.24 hours of work. Let me show you the buckets. The argument ended pretty quickly. And we did. You want to focus. Don't get distracted. Create reference models and proofs for what you're doing. Okay? And communicate all the time. Your data is going to give you the visibility, defense, sales. If you're trying to sell this program inside of your organization or selling what you're doing to others, it helps you defend all of that. Okay, manage your delivery team like a startup. Focus on it. Be hungry every day. Every day, ask yourself and your team, is what I'm doing in the best interest of the organization? Right? All of these things, remember, keep it in context. What you're doing is removing fear of change. You're helping people motivate towards the right answers. Right? And you're building trust in the organization, which leads to collaboration, which leads to DevOps culture. Okay? So, again, just a quick summary there. People buy with emotion, justify with logic. It's true. You know, if I want something, I'm like, hey, I really like that. What do I need to tell my wife to get it, right? I want to buy that thing. Just a review of startup mentality. And so let's pull it together real quick here. Start in a deterministic place. So here's a little roadmap for you. Start in a place with advocates. Establish some kind of reference that people can start to say, yeah, it works. Okay? Not big, very focused. Define your starting point. I like to start with this if we're talking about CI/CD. Baseline, measure it, deliver the increment of success, lock it down, build on the success, advance it forward, and keep communicating. Okay? Here's your big ideas. Have humility. Be the trust that you want others to be. Right? Continue to talk about the vision, communicate, alliances, focus 80-20, do a few things well that align to the goals. Just deliver. You need to deliver consistently. It doesn't have to be big, it has to be consistent. And you need end-to-end value streams, and then don't empower, emancipate people, free them from you. Okay? So you don't buy DevOps, you be DevOps. Okay? And I think 10:30, wow, okay, I had to skip a few slides. All right, thank you.